Welcome everyone to this webinar. I'm going to start in just a moment, but I want to thank you for joining today. We are going to be talking about, I feel, a very interesting topic, and that's modular content and how content creators can use modular content. A quick introduction for those of you who don't know me. My name is Michael Andrews. I am Content Strategy Evangelist at Kentico Content. I've been working in the field of content strategy and user experience for the past 2 decades. So today, what we're going to talk about is modular content, and some of you may be familiar with the term content model. It really is the same topic, but I'm thinking about this from the perspective of people who are creating content and how they want the content to be organized and presented to audiences. So I'm using the term modular content to think about what we can do with content. So we're going to talk about what modular content is, and it's going to be a non-technical discussion. It's going to be an introduction. So if you don't know anything about this topic, you should hopefully learn what some of the basics are. If you already know something about the topic, that's great too. Hopefully you can build on your knowledge. Specifically, I want to bring an editorial perspective to this topic because I feel that often people talk about things like modular content in a very technical way, and it's very easy to get sort of bogged down in the technical details. And I want us to really step back and focus on what we're trying to achieve by using this approach. I will go through a worked example and we'll give you an idea of how you can take a topic and make it modular, and that way you can do things with it. And at the end, we'll have some time for questions and answers. So I will speak probably for 35, maybe 40 minutes or so, but we'll have some time at the end for questions. So if you have questions about something I've said, you want some clarification, you want me to expand on it, please jot those questions down. You can put them in the window there for questions, and I will do my best to answer them at the end of the session. So let's look at what modular content is, and I misspelled that there, but we'll be all right. This is just an example of modular content, and there are several screens here for a company that sells keyboards. And on the left-hand side, we have some overview of the keyboard. So there's different aspects of the keyboard, and you have an overview of the different kinds of keyboards that the company offers. You move from that overview to a short list of items. So if you choose some attributes of a keyboard that you're interested in, you get a list of keyboards there, and this would be scrolling down on the screen there. And then if you tap on one of these items, then you get to the screen on the far right, which is kind of a preview of the full description about this keyboard. So we can see that there's different levels of detail here, and modularity supports that. We can also use modularity to organize information. So continuing on with this example, we have the top of the screen there on the left-hand side is sort of the preview of all the information about this keyboard. And as you go through, you get descriptions of different features about the keyboard, and at the end are details relating to the keyboard, things like the warranty information. Now, this is really, really handy because it's helping us think about what information we need to make available for this keyboard, and in fact, every other keyboard that this company is selling. Another feature of modularity is it lets you reuse information. So here we have 2 screens for different keyboards. And you can see that, they look a little bit similar, the screens do, but they have different names for the keyboards. The pictures are different. The price is actually different, but there's one piece of information that is the same on both these screens, and that is that there's free shipping for over $29. And what this has is the ability to take a piece of information and insert it in multiple places. So that information about the shipping is located as a separate piece of information, and it can be inserted where it's needed. And this is a very useful feature of modular content. So the benefits really are numerous. We have the ability to make it easier to create content because we have a structure, a plan for how we're going to develop our information, and we know exactly what information we need. We have it easier to update information in one place, like I showed you with the shipping charge. So if the shipping threshold changed from $29 to say $39, we would very easily just be able to update that information in that one place, and it would update everywhere that it appears. And then the other benefit is that we can rearrange these modules. So we saw with this keyboard that there were, you went from overview, and then you got into descriptions of features, and then at the very end you had some details like the warranty. We could rearrange the order where if you wanted to put the warranty information before the description of features, you can do that. Now, to make content modular is a collaboration. It's a collaboration between, at a minimum, people who create content, like a writer, and people who are involved with the back-end coding of the content, the developers. And it's really important that both these parties be involved. It's actually a good idea to maybe even include other people, like people on your UX team will have some good suggestions and insights. But what we want to do is make sure that content creators, people like writers, are involved in this process, because it is really, really important that they participate and that they have their perspectives represented in this. Sometimes people consider this a technical topic, and they'll defer to developers to do all the work. And while the developers have some very important things to offer here, they don't know everything about what the content needs to do. And that's why the writer perspective is so important. And this is not just my point of view, it's actually a point of view that a lot of content strategists hold. And so here's a quote from a content strategist. She gave a talk a few weeks ago talking about modular content. Her name is Paola Rocuzzo, and she works for the government digital service in the UK. And she mentions that it's very easy to get so focused on these technical details that you lose sight of what it is you're trying to solve, what is important, what are the opportunities. And that's what I want to focus on in this webinar with you. So we really want to think about, what does the customer need to see? The customer is bombarded with a lot of information every day, and they have their attention in many different places, and they're often looking at a very small screen. So we want to be thinking about what specific information they need and how we can structure it in a way that it can be presented as they need it in the best possible way. And I would like to suggest that modular content is a lot like a bicycle. So if you think about a bicycle, it's made up of lots of parts. We have a frame, we have wheels, we have a saddle, we have a handlebars, all kinds of different things like that. And these get bolted together. And what you do is you choose which parts you want for a bike, and you have some ability to change these parts. So you could change the seat possibly if you wanted, or change the handlebars. And when you change the parts, that changes the overall item. And that's really how modular content works. It is made of pieces. We designed the pieces so that they can fit together, and also be able to change the pieces, and that will change what you can do with the content. Now, I'd like to suggest that modular content is not just like a bicycle as an analogy, but we can actually think about bicycles as a way of considering how we'd manage it as modular content. So think about bicycles, and I am not an expert on bicycles. I don't currently own a bike. I haven't had one in a while, but I have thought about getting one. And I remember about a year ago seeing some articles like this one. This is from the Washington Post. And it was talking about that fewer kids are riding bikes, and our bike sales were going down, and it seemed that, you know, kids were more interested in video games, and maybe you know, other people were sort of interested more in e-scooters and not so much in bikes anymore. And the bike industry was a little worried that people were losing interest in bikes. Now, you fast forward it to today, and I'm seeing articles like this from the New York Times a few weeks ago, and it's mentioning that lots of people are interested in buying bikes now. And so many, in fact, are interested that there's a wait to get bikes. These bike shops are overrun, and I even see that in my neighborhood here. So it's interesting to see the sudden interest in bikes. And what has changed? Well, obviously, we have a pandemic now. And I think it's probably the case that many people want to get outside. They've spent a lot of time inside with computer games. They may be a little wary of taking shared transportation. So maybe these rental e-scooters aren't as appealing. They want to have their own set of wheels. So we have a lot of people interested in bikes, but they haven't been thinking about bikes for very long. So they may not really know what it is that they're looking for. And if you go to a website for a manufacturer of bikes, you may see something like this. You'll see lots of details. So there'll be details about the crankset, about the headset, the fork, all these different details in a bike. And unless you're an expert on bikes, you may not understand what any of this means. I know I certainly don't know what most of this means. I see the pedals are plastic. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Now, the point of this is that we're not trying to structure information for the sake of doing it. There's a lot of detail here. We could go wild with all the detail, but we're not trying to create a database. We're trying to organize information that's going to be useful to people. And if someone is not an expert on bikes, this is probably not the right information for them. So let's think about how we would structure information, structure content for someone who is interested in bikes but doesn't know a lot about bikes. So we start with the person's interest and priorities. And we have a person here, and she is thinking about a bike, and she has some obvious questions that she needs to answer. I mean, there are lots of different types of bikes, so which one does she want? And we know there are all these details around bikes, and she needs to know which details are important. But even beyond that, there are broader questions that she needs to think through. Why does she want a bike? You know, what is she looking to do with her bike? And where does she hope to ride the bike? Because that's going to influence a lot of what she plans to do in the way of making choices around bikes. And we can take these interests and priorities and convert them into topics for our content. So each of these red rectangles here is a topic or an issue that we'll talk about in our content. And we need this to help people make decisions. So the person needs to figure out the right bike type for her. We're going to assume she only needs one bike, so she only needs to settle on one bike type. But she may have other decisions that involve several things. So she may have one riding goal, or she may have a couple of different riding goals that she's thinking about. She may want to ride it only on one surface, or she may be wanting to ride it across different surfaces. And she needs to make decisions around features, and there are lots of features that could be available to her. So this is our starting point for thinking about making our content modular, addressing these topics here. Now, we want to cover these topics and provide answers. That's really our goal in making the content modular. Now, what's interesting is that these topics are interrelated. They influence each other. So we have different bike types that are designed to for different riding goals. So if you have a particular riding goal, you should be looking at a certain type of bike. The bike types are have different features and options that are typically associated with them. The riding goals take place on different surfaces, and some surfaces, depending upon their characteristics, suggest that certain features would be useful to have. So we can see that these topics are interrelated, and what we want to do is help our readers make connections between these so they understand the bigger picture, and they can develop meaning. So they're not down in these little tiny details, lost and not understanding what a crankset is. They're really understanding what it is that they want. So we can then look at these things, and we will show the relevance of all these different issues. So the next part of this is to look at each of our topics and then look at what aspects of each topic is important. So we can take each of our 4 topics here and think about the aspects that are going to be important to our reader. There are people will ask questions about these in relationship to the topic. So if we have a writing goal, people want to think about, how much time would it be, would there be if I wanted to pursue that goal? How physically demanding is it? What sort of, if there are any practical benefits? Is it fun? Those are kinds of things that people think about with writing goals. If they're thinking about where they're going to ride their bike, the surfaces have different characteristics. Maybe there are different safety considerations. Maybe there are performance issues they need to be thinking about on different surfaces. And these things, of course, influence the actual discussions about the bike types and the features. And we need to kind of drill into what is the details that are important relating to the bike types and the features. And all these are what I'll call points of difference. So you could have different bike types, and they're going to start differing as you look at these different aspects. So they may differ, different bike types may have different weight characteristics, or they may have different ride characteristics. So that's why these aspects are important, is helping people understand some distinctions and some of the things that are going to be important to them. So we want to think about this, the stuff here in blue as the depth that we're going to go into with our content. These are the things we want to cover. And we want to develop content that covers all these areas where it's relevant. Now, that doesn't mean that we have to show every one of these aspects every time we talk about this. We could maybe show a subset of it, but we have this all available for us to use when it makes sense to show that. And the final area we want to think about is the categories for each topic. So when we talk about writing surfaces, what kinds of writing surfaces are we thinking about? These are categories. Writing goals, what kinds of writing goals are there? What kinds of bike types are there? What kinds of features are there? And this will give us a range of things that we'll talk about with respect to each of these topics. So we want to think about all the categories that are going to be important to our customers and to us as an organization publishing content for the customer. So we don't necessarily have to be encyclopedic if we don't care about certain kinds of bike types because it's just not of interest to our customers and it's not of interest to us as an organization. We don't have to cover it. So we don't necessarily have to go into tandem bikes if that's not what we're about and not what our customers are interested in. So to give you a sense of what the categories would look like in this area, we have riding surfaces could be things like gravel or city streets or trails or the beach. You can come up with many more than that, but I'm just giving you a sense of what some of these categories are. Similarly for riding goals, some people want a bike to commute, some people want it to ride around and explore nature, some people want a bike for endurance training, transporting goods, a lot of different motivations people have for a bike. And then bike types have categories already. There are things like mountain bikes, road bikes, and hybrid bikes, et cetera, et cetera. Now, not all your readers may know what these categories mean. So here is your opportunity to really describe what they are and help people be able to distinguish the difference between a hybrid bike and a mountain bike, for example. And then we have different features and options. And again, there are many of these, and it will be your decision as you are building out your modular content to decide which categories you want to cover. You may not want to go into cranksets, but you want to cover some major things that seem to have an influence on what people care about as it relates to their goals and to where they're going to ride their bike. So we have done now in this very short period of time, created a rudimentary model for our content. And if you work with people who on the technical side are building out this thing called a content model, which is really how your content management system is taking the structure and being able to address it, they're going to be using certain terms. And so I want to kind of map that formal terminology to what we've been talking about. So the red topics we have at the top are referred to as content types more formally. The blue that go into the different aspects of the topics are called content elements. And then the yellow, the categories that we have here are referred to as taxonomy terms. So it's very easy to get kind of lost with the technical jargon here, but it really are just formal terms for some basic things of having your topics or your issues that you're talking about, the aspects of the issues and the categories that you have. So we have a rudimentary content model already, and this is great. We have the ability to plan content. We have an idea of what we want to cover, what in terms of the depth, in terms of the range of things, and it's really, really useful for us as authors or content creators to have this model. Now, the question then is, how do our readers experience this? I mean, right now, this just looks like a bunch of sticky notes. And sticky notes are actually a good way to start thinking through all this, but this is not how our readers are going to encounter the content. So I want to give you a sense of how that will happen. And really, I think the wonderful thing about modular content is that it lets us mix and match content in different ways. So we have the ability to connect different topics together and show them and let people explore things from different angles. Now, there really are two ways to connect modules. The first I'm going to call copresenting, which is where it's a little bit more of a situational way of approaching this. So if you think about sort of a curatorial approach where you decide each time how you want to bring together different pieces of content, you are using this approach, and you can show related items together in different contexts. So you can think about all the different ways that you might want to show things together, different items, and you have the liberty to do that. It's very, very flexible. You as the editor get to decide what items you want to pull in based on goals that you have, which could change over time. The other approach to connecting these modules is by linking. So linking is more of a fixed formal relationship between different topics, and there's a kind of a cross-referencing between the topics that provides the link there. And it works a little differently. It's a very automatic thing. The linked item will always be included. So it's very good in saving you effort if you always know you always want to show certain items together, whereas the other is better if you're looking for a more flexible approach where you are going to be changing what you want to show together. So I'm going to start by just showing you the more situational co-presenting style, because I think that's a little easier to show how this works. So let's imagine we have a screen or a web page or whatever, however we're delivering this to our customers, and we have a headline, "Enjoy beach biking." And we can take this page and divide it into 4 sections. So what it's like, the best bike type, making most of your experience, and a focused feature. Now we have this general template here for presenting this information. We have a headline on the top. And what we can do is we can insert existing content that we've created into each of these sections. So when we talk about what it's like, we can go into the riding surface. And since we're talking about beach biking, we're going to talk about the beach. So what's it like riding a bike on sand? We have the ability for best bike type to look at the bike type topic, and specifically in the category of beach cruiser, and pull in the content about that. For a writing goal, where we're looking at making the most of our experience, we can look at touring as the category. And our focus feature, we may pull in content on the topic of features for the category of fat tires, because fat tires apparently are better for riding on the beach. So we have this ability to just take this existing content that we've already created, we've created it based on our structure, and then pull it into this context here. We want to use it for this page talking about beach biking. Now, if we wanted to do something different, let's say it's about mountain biking now, we have a similar ability to pull in content. We actually just sort of change the headline and swap out the different sections there with different content, and instead of talking about the riding surface being the beach and sand, we're talking about steep dirt trails. And we're going to talk about a mountain bike rather than a beach cruiser. And we'll talk about adventure as our experience, and look at maybe the suspension system for our feature, because that's important on the rough surfaces of mountain trails. So we have this ability to kind of agilely swap out content to support different purposes. Now, we have other options though. So we could have a different sort of presentation here where our headline is "Which biking vacation is for you?" And we have 2 sides. One side on the left deals with biking at the beach, and we can again reuse the same content that we had before, talking about the beach as a riding surface and the bike type as being the beach cruiser. And then we can have that side by side with biking in the mountains. So we can talk about steep trails and mountain bikes on the right-hand side. So we're now really supporting a different goal. We're giving people sort of a different experience. They're thinking about their vacation more generally and how biking fits into that vacation. So this is part of the power of the modularity. Now I'm going to show you the other approach, where it's just linking. And so we'll go back to, as I said, the basis of our content model here. We have the 4 topics in red. There are what are called our content types. And what we want to do is link these together. And really in this situation, I think the bike type is really kind of the hub of this because everything is ultimately sort of centered around the bike type. So we basically create some ways of linking this. We look at sort of the key features of the bike type. We can link it over to the features topic. We can look at uses of a bike type and connect it to writing goals. We can look at surfaces and connect it to writing surfaces. And there is the ability to link back to bike types if you're looking at writing surfaces and you want to know the best bike type for that writing surface. You could go to the bike types, or if you have a particular writing goal in mind, you can look at a best bike type and see those writing types. So this is a different approach. It's much more sort of automatic and fixed. It doesn't necessarily give you the same flexibility. And there's a few more technical details in terms of how this is done that I'm not going to really have time to get into today. But it does make this very easy to plan this content together and use it in different ways when you are linking these issues together like this. So that's really how content models work, how you make your content modular. So let's recap what we have been talking about here. So again, the first step really is to identify the key issues of interest to your readers. So you want to think about the key decisions that are on their minds, and these are going to be the issues that you want to start to organize your content around. And you think about the questions people have: what, why, how, which, who, when, those sorts of questions, and that will be sort of giving you a sense of some of the key issues that you want to have as your main topics or your content types. You want to think about how these issues are both independent and interconnected. So this is really an interesting thing. So you think about these issues as being independent because sometimes you just want to talk about them on a standalone basis. You want to be able to present information or content about the issue, and people will understand what you're talking about, even if you're not showing anything else with it. But you also want the ability to show it together with other topics, because the topics do influence each other, and it makes sense to let people be aware of how they're conceptually related so that they get an understanding of the larger issues here. The third step is to break down the issues into their different aspects to highlight what I'm calling their points of difference. So, you know, thinking about the kinds of questions people are going to have around the topic, these sort of generic questions they'll have, and that will help them to understand the fourth area, which is the categories. So we want to think about the unique categories for each issue. And these are basically the variations that we will be discussing in the content. All right, so that is it in a nutshell, how we make our content modular. There are more resources available because I have only given you a very basic introduction here. If you're really wanting more of a non-technical nature, there are a couple of items on the left-hand side here, and I'll be sending a link to these slides after the webinar is over, so you don't have to worry about copying this material down here. But you may be interested in reading those articles. If you're interested in more of the technical details, particularly like the linking that I talked about at the end there, we have just produced a new ebook, came out last week, written by one of our partners in Canada. A really good book. It's a little, as I said, a little bit more technical than the presentation I've given today, but if you have an interest in this topic, I do encourage you to look at that. Okay, so we're going to open this up for questions now, and as I said, I am happy to address any questions that people have about something I've said. If you want a clarification, if you want me to expand on anything, or if there's something I didn't cover that you really are interested in, feel free to type it in the window there, and I'll do my best to answer it. And also, if you just have any comments about the presentation, I'm happy to hear about that as well. It's always interesting for me to think about how to talk about this issue, because we can start getting into a lot of technical details very quickly, and I'm trying to find good ways to discuss this that's going to make sense for people. So if you do have any comments about the clarity of what I've said, please feel free to raise that as well. And while we're waiting, if there are any questions, as I said, we do have a number of resources about this. I've actually been writing a series of blog posts in the past few weeks looking at structuring content from different aspects, thinking about it from the editorial perspective, just how we maintain content easily by structuring it. Also, I've been exploring some of the user experience aspects, like what can we do with presenting content, different ways of presenting content when it's modular. So thinking back to the first slides in this presentation where we're showing some actual screens, and one of the wonderful things about modular content is that you have a lot of flexibility in terms of what you present to people as they're looking on screens. So you get to control that detail a lot, and there's a lot of neat things you can do with that. All right, great. So we have a couple of entries here. Not a question, but just wanted to say the bicycle metaphor is really useful. I'll be stealing it for discussions with stakeholders, so thank you. I'm glad to hear that. Thank you, David, for that comment. I do think a bicycle really is one of the more modular products that I could think of, and so I think it was a good thing. And obviously, people have a familiarity with bicycles. It's something that everyone can relate to, whereas not everyone's going to necessarily know about some other kind of product or game or something else that might also be modular. So great, thanks for that. All right, so Cynthia has a question here. In a cross-functional team, which role would break the content up into those attributes you showed us? Would it be the content strategist? And I would say yes, it would be the content strategist. Now there's probably going to be some discussion back and forth with the other members of the team. They may have their own suggestions about how to structure things. They may suggest that, oh, well, why can't you just combine those two things together? And you would want to say, all right, the reason I am breaking them out this way is because I think it will help me to plan the content better and also give us a little bit more flexibility in how we present the content. So as I said, it is a discussion, and also your user experience team members may have some ideas too as they're planning screens where the content will be presented. They may say, oh, well, this would be a great thing to show in a list, for example. And so we could take one of those content elements, the aspects of the topic, and put it into a list, and that would be a possibility. So do encourage contributions from other team members around this, but don't feel shy about taking some leadership in defining this, because you are the ones who really know about content and what it needs to deliver. All right. I have time for another question if there are any other questions. And we are making a recording of this, so in the event that you want to listen to me again or maybe share it with a colleague, we'll have the recording available in the next day or two, and so that will be available for you. Okay, so at this point, I'm not seeing any more questions. I do really want to thank all of you for joining today. It really is terrific to have all of you interested in this. And if you're not aware, I do write quite a lot on the Kentico content blog. That's the URL where you can basically find everything I've been writing. So you're most welcome to look through those articles and see other things I've written if they might be of interest to you. Again, thanks everyone for joining, and I look forward to talking with you again, either in another webinar or some other conversation we may be having. So thanks.